Do not worry about this worm. His kind yelps in terror at the sight of your mightiness. We will dispose of him ourselves.
Eternal Darkness gets remembered for one big reason. It messed with the player. The Sanity system reaches out into how you read the game. Menus act strange, the sound feels off or just wrong. Stuff starts to happen that makes you stop and just stare for a second, trying to figure out if the game is breaking or if you are. That confusion sticks around. It turns into distrust. You keep playing, but you're never fully sure of what's real anymore. Over time, the idea of sanity slipping becomes something that you feel as a player.
This isn't really happening!
But what was Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem? When Eternal Darkness came out, it felt like it showed up from a strange place. This was 2002, the early GameCube era. Nintendo had a reputation for games that felt dependable. You turned something on and things clicked pretty fast. Even their darker games still had a sense of clarity to them. You usually knew what kind of experience you were stepping into within the first couple minutes of the game. Eternal Darkness landed right in the middle of that. Part of that comes from who made it. The game was developed by Silicon Knights, a studio that had already worked on Blood Omen. They were interested in darker themes and longer ideas, stuff that carried weight and didn't always resolve cleanly. Nintendo partnering with them already made the project feel a little bit off. The game had also been around for a while. It started its life on the N64. It had been shown years earlier, back when Nintendo was still fully supporting that system. By the time it finally released, it had crossed into a new console generation. That transition's important. The game was reworked during that shift, visually, structurally, even tonally. It ended up landing on the GameCube feeling slightly out of sync with the rest of Nintendo's early lineup. And Nintendo still published it.
What's going on here?
That alone gives you a lot of context. This became the first Nintendo published game to receive an M rating. It wasn't rated M like Resident Evil, it wasn't shocking or loud. It was because of the space it occupied. The pacing was slow, the information came in gradually, the game asks for patience. At the time, horror games were usually pretty easy to read for the most part. You could tell pretty quickly what lane something was in. Action heavy, atmospheric, campy, gore focused. The marketing for Eternal Darkness didn't really clarify that. It showed familiar imagery, like a mansion, blood, monsters, without explaining how the game wanted to be approached. So a lot of people went in without a clear expectation. Once you start playing, that lack of framing carries over. The opening doesn't spend a whole lot of time setting the table. It doesn't just walk you through the world. You aren't given a clear anchor to anything. The game just starts moving and makes you move with it. That lines up with how it's structured. Eternal Darkness wasn't built around a single character or a straight path. It moves across different time periods, different people, different places. The connections are there, but they aren't underlined early. So you end up piecing together what kind of experience this is while you're already inside it. On the GameCube, that felt strange. This was a system people associated with control and consistency. Games that behaved in predictable ways. Eternal Darkness carried a very different energy. You can feel the ambition behind it. Silicon Knights wanted to make something that lingered and stayed with you, something that didn't rush to explain itself. That kind of approach didn't really have a lot of clear reference points on consoles at the time. People didn't really have a language or mindset for that yet. Cosmic horror wasn't a common talking point in games. Stories that stretched across centuries using different characters as fragments weren't familiar to people. Confusion itself wasn't something most games leaned into intentionally. So when people picked it up, they weren't taught how to read it. They were just asked to keep going and figure it out along the way. That's where the discomfort with it starts to settle in. The game keeps moving without forming a familiar rhythm. You progress without that early sense of understanding that usually takes shape. You start noticing gaps or missing context, or small moments that don't really quite line up yet. That feeling mirrors how the game came to exist. a long development, a shift between generations, a developer pushing towards something heavier, and a publisher willing to release something that sat outside its usual image. Eternal Darkness didn't arrive as part of some big wave or trend, it arrived on its own. And that's how I felt when people first played it, like something that expected you to sit with uncertainty longer than usual. Before the story really takes shape, or the structure becomes clear, before you understand what kind of horror you've stepped into. That tone shows up immediately. That uncertainty you sit with early on doesn't just stay in the story or the structure, it starts showing up in how the game behaves while you're playing. The game gives itself room to feel unstable, things can shift around a little, and that feeling is tied pretty closely to how you start taking things in moment to moment. That's where the Sanity system comes in. Sanity in this game shapes how things come across to you. As your character's sanity changes, the game starts changing alongside it. At first, it's kind of slow and quiet. There's no big moment where it stops and calls attention to itself. You usually notice it halfway through moving around, when something feels slightly off and you're not totally sure when it started.
Can't be happening!
Sometimes it shows up visually. Angles feel off, spaces don't quite settle in the way you'd expect them to. In the extreme, your head can just fall off, or you might misfire your gun and shoot yourself. Other times it's audio. Sounds hit kind of weird. Silence hangs around just long enough that you notice it. Or a droning will start and you'll hear disembodied cries and moans. Familiar cues are there, but they don't line up the same way every time. And it's never about one moment sticking out. It's the way those moments start stacking together. You're not reacting to a single thing happening. You're reacting to a pattern that's forming while you're still moving forward. After a while, that starts changing how you play. You slow down without really thinking about it. You hesitate before you commit to something. Stuff that would normally feel automatic gets a second look. It's not really about the game telling you to play it differently. It's more about your trust in what you're seeing gradually decaying. That shift is part of the design. The Sanity system is there to bring you closer to the character's headspace. A place where reality doesn't feel locked in, where certainty has some give to it. Where things can slide just enough to keep you from fully settling. And that carries into the moments people usually remember the most. As Sanity drops further, the game starts leaning into your expectations a little more. It reaches into habits that you've picked up from playing other games over the years. Things happen that look familiar. The screen changes, a message pops up, signals show up in a place that don't catch your attention right away. And for just a second, you're not really reacting as the character anymore. You're reacting as you, the player, sitting with your controller, trying to make sense of what just happened. That moment hangs there for a bit, and it works because it's pulling from a shared experience. The game knows that you recognize certain signals. You've seen how systems usually behave, you know what certain screens and messages tend to mean. Eternal Darkness leans on that knowledge and lets your brain fill in the rest, and then it moves on. Control comes back, the game keeps going, and you're left with that after effect. That small disconnect where you're still not completely sure whether what you saw belonged to the game itself or something outside of it.
What's going on here?
That's where it starts to settle into the game as a whole. With cosmic horror, sanity usually sits alongside fear. It's tied to scale, to being exposed to things that don't line up cleanly with how people understand the world. You're taking in information that's too big, too heavy, and it never arrives in a way that makes sense right away. Perception starts slipping under the weight of it. The game carries that idea straight into playing it. Insanity isn't something you just hear about or see in passing. It's something you go through yourself. It shows up in the act of moving through the game, watching the screen, trying to read what's happening while things feel a little less stable than they did before. And because it keeps happening, it starts teaching you how to exist inside it. You get used to treating certainty as something temporary. Familiar signals don't land the same way every time. You find yourself checking your own reactions, like you're not fully trusting that first read anymore. The repetition doesn't flatten the experience, it pulls you further into it. You keep going, knowing things can shift again. That's why the Sanity system fits this game the way it does. It lines your headspace up with what the game is about. With cosmic horror, a lot of that comes down to perspective. You're aware that what you're seeing isn't the whole picture. Your senses are doing their best, but they're limited. And trying to understand what's happening carries a cost with it. Eternal Darkness builds that cost into how the game behaves. By the time you're deep into it, sanity isn't something you're just checking on a meter. It's something you feel in how you move through the rooms, how closely you watch what's happening, and how often you stop for a second to decide whether what just happened should be trusted. That's where it really lands, because the danger in this game is never right in front of you. It sits in how willing you are to take what you're seeing as face value. Hey, just real quick, if you made it this far, thanks for hanging out with me for a little bit. I really do appreciate you. If you're enjoying the video so far, consider subbing. There's already a lot of stuff on the channel, and I've got plans for a lot more going forward. If you want to help this one grow, giving it a like, sharing it with a friend, or leaving a comment go a long way. I'd especially love to hear what you thought about Eternal Darkness when you first played it. Did any of the insanity effects ever get you? Like, did you have one of those moments where you actually thought something went wrong for a second? Because honestly, recording this, there was a few times it got me. I thought the game crashed a couple times. And if you've never played it, or you've never even heard of it before this video, I'd love to hear what you think about it so far. And if you're watching on mobile, there's also the hype button. It's only there for the first 7 days of the video's life, but it's another way that you can directly help grow the video. It tells the algorithm, hey, this video is good, show it to more people. And one more thing, I'd also like to thank everyone who supported the channel through super chats on the streams for this game. It really does mean a lot to me that you all feel the want to donate to the channel. But if you've never caught one of the live streams before, I usually stream whatever game I'm working on Wednesdays and Friday nights. So hopefully I'll see you there. But that's enough of all that. Let's get back into the game and actually talk about the combat and the gameplay, because there's still a lot of really interesting things going on here. Combat asks you to pay attention in a very specific way. When something comes at you, you're not just swinging or firing and hoping for the best. You can focus in, lock onto what you're dealing with, and actually aim where you want your attacks to land. Arms, heads, or their torso. It turns fights into a series of small decisions instead of one long reaction. That changes how fights feel almost immediately. Targeting body parts makes you slow down just enough to think about what you're doing. You start watching how enemies move, where they open themselves up, and how close you're willing to get before committing. With combat in this game, you're trying to control the fight. That control is really important because enemies don't always behave the same way. Even similar types have little differences in how they move or respond. Some take hits differently, some force you to adjust where you're aiming. Locking onto specific parts gives you a way to respond instead of just reacting. Weapons feed into that as well. Early on, when combat stays more physical, body targeting feels intimate. You're close enough that positioning and timing are always on your mind. Later, when guns enter the picture, that same system carries over. You're still making choices about where your attention goes, even from a distance. It keeps the combat from slipping into autopilot. You're always doing a quick mental check. Where am I standing? What am I aiming at? How much time do I have before this goes sideways? That layer of focus sits underneath every fight, even the smaller ones. So instead of combat feeling like a break from exploration, it feels like an extension of it. Another space where awareness matters, and where rushing through things tends to create more problems than it solves. At the center of all of it is the Tome of Eternal Darkness. Every chapter kind of circles around it. No matter who you're playing as or what time period you dropped into, there's always that opening stretch where the character is just trying to get through what's in front of them. They're moving through a space, reacting to things as they happen without much sense of how any of it connects yet. And then the tome shows up. That moment shifts how the chapter feels. Once the character comes into contact with it, they're not just dealing with their own situation anymore. They're stepping into something that's already been in motion for a very long time. Getting the tome is always treated carefully. There's usually some tension around it, some build-up. When the character finally touches it, the game slows down a little bit and gives that moment room to breathe. Like it knows this is something being passed along. You're taken into that strange room that exists outside normal time and place. There's disembodied screaming as the floor is moving faces. It feels removed from everything else, less like a physical location and more like a pause, a space where knowledge gets handed over. It makes the tome feel like something you interact with, not just something you stick in your inventory. From there, it starts behaving like a living document. Each character adds to it, and when someone new finds it, they don't start from scratch. They pick up everything else that's already there. Spells learned earlier stay learned, abilities carry forward, knowledge builds on itself. The tome slowly fills in, shaped by everyone who's touched it before. That continuity ends up holding the whole game together. As the story jumps across centuries, the tome stays with you. Different lives, different moments, but the same growing body of knowledge moving forward. You can feel the history in it, how much it contains, how much it's absorbed over time. That accumulation has weight to it. Every new character steps into something that's already been written on. They're working with power that's been shaped by people they never met, often without really knowing what the power has already done. The tome carries all that forward, layered one on top of the other. Once it's in your hands, the game opens up a bit more. That's when you start to see the deeper systems tied with it, the symbols, the language, the idea of shaping power using knowledge that's already there, rather than discovering something fresh. That's where magic starts to take up real space in how you play. It asks for attention and time and brings a different kind of tension with it. Once the tome is in play, the magic starts becoming part of how you think through situations. It's built around runes. Everything comes back to those. As you explore, you start finding individual runes, bits of language pulled from different places and different time periods. Each one represents a piece of intent. On their own, they don't do much, but you can feel they're meant to be combined. Putting a spell together is basically that process. You're shaping something out of parts. You choose an alignment which ties the spell to one of the ancients. That choice is super important because each alignment carries its own influence. It affects how strong the spell is, how it behaves, and how it interacts with other forces in the game. Over time, you start getting a feel for those relationships just through using it. Then you choose what the spell is meant to do, an action followed by what it's meant to affect, a target. From there, you can add more runes to push it further, increase its strength or extend its effect. Each extra piece adds more weight to what you're casting. What's nice about it is that you're encouraged to experiment. You're not locked into one solution. You try combinations, see what happens, and once you successfully create a spell, it sticks with you. It becomes part of the tome going forward. Learning the spells happens naturally as you move through the game. You find scrolls that show combinations, codex that help you understand what certain runes represent. Slowly, the language starts making sense, and because the tome carries knowledge forward, spells don't disappear when characters change. What you learn stays learned. That continuity is really important. As the story jumps between characters, you're not resetting your understanding of magic each time. You're building on it. A character centuries later can tap into knowledge uncovered long before them. It makes the magic system feel cumulative, like something that's growing alongside the story. And then actually using the spells carries its own tension. Casting isn't instant, it's not fast. When you start a spell, you're committing to it. Your character has to stand still while the runes are spoken and the spell takes shape. That pause really matters, especially when things are happening around you. If you move too soon or get hit, the spell breaks and the moment passes. And the stronger spells take longer. They use more runes, more intent, and more time. And that means you're constantly weighing the situation. Do you have the space to finish casting? Can you afford to stand still right now? Is this the moment to push for something powerful, or is it safer just to keep moving? That decision lives right in the middle of the combat and exploration. Magic in this game asks for patience, asks you to read the room, judge the risk, and commit when you feel the timing is right. And that's what makes it fit so well here. You don't just unlock these spells or level them up. There's something you build, something you inherit, and something you have to take responsibility for every time you use them. The process of creating, learning, and casting them carries the same weight and caution that runs through the rest of the game. Magic becomes another place where attention matters, where rushing tends to cost you, and another way the game asks you to slow down and think before you act. Throughout this whole video, we've already talked about the fact that Eternal Darkness moves across different characters and different time periods, and that they're all connected. That part's probably pretty clear by now. What's worth slowing down for a second though is how the game actually uses that structure. It isn't just self-contained stories or jumping around for variety. The game is built like an anthology that keeps looping back in on itself. You step into a moment, live inside it for a while, then move on. A new place, new person, different time. And like we went over with the tome, the knowledge you're carrying keeps coming with you. And then between those chapters, the game keeps returning you to the same present day place. And that loop is really important in this game. Those returns give everything a kind of rhythm. You're constantly moving outward into the past, then pulling back into the same point. Each time you come back, you're carrying more context with you. Not really answers yet, just the weight of everything. A growing sense that what you're seeing now has already happened before, and then it's going to echo again. Because the characters change, but the pattern doesn't. You start recognizing shapes instead of details, familiar situations, similar decisions, the same kind of danger showing up in different areas, wearing different faces. It creates this feeling that the horror isn't progressing in a straight line, it's cycling, spiraling. That structure does a lot of work here. It keeps you from getting fully settled into one perspective. Just as you start to feel grounded in one character, that game moves on. What stays with you isn't the person, it's what they learned, and what they pass forward. By the time you spend a few hours in the game, the structure itself starts doing some of the unsettling. Because at that point it's not just events unfolding, you're watching the same kind of moment repeat, slowly filling in from different angles.
You have kept imprisoned. Thou hast seen the last of this world.
story in Eternal Darkness starts in a pretty small place. You're playing as Alexandra Roivas, coming back to her family estate in Rhode Island after her grandfather Edward Roivas is found murdered. He doesn't have much context yet. She's not chasing some huge answer right away. She's just trying to understand what happened and what her grandfather was involved in before he died. That search takes her through the house, room by room, until she finds a hidden space, and inside that room is the tome. Once Alex starts reading it, the scope of the story changes. The book contains the accounts of all the other people we've seen in the video, their lives and their locations, and just their moments in history. Each one is a fragment of something that's been unfolding for a long time.
The gift is your life, sweet dancer. The obligation is this. You hold one of Mantarok's hearts, the essence of a corpse god. To some, it is a source of great power.
Behind those stories are the Ancients. These are godlike beings that exist outside human scale. 3 of them sit at the center of the conflict. Each one represents a different force pressing against reality. Their influence just seeps into history over time, shaping events, corrupting people, and slowly bending outcomes across centuries. You see how that influence takes hold pretty early. The first chapter outside of Alex is Pius Augustus. He's a Roman centurion. During his chapter, he encounters 3 ancient artifacts, each tied to one of the Ancients. The moment he chooses one, he becomes aligned with that Ancient. That choice sets the direction of the entire playthrough, and it's a choice that you make as the player, which Ancient rises, what kind of enemies appear, and how events continue unfolding. Pius stays present throughout the rest of the game. As the story moves across different eras, his actions keep echoing forward. Sometimes he's there directly, other times it's the consequences of what he's done showing up later.
Fool for trying to save him, Anthony. His fate was decided many centuries ago, as is the fate of this world. Despite your faith, there is little to save you from the power of Chitauri.
He becomes the thread running through the entire history of the conflict, shaped by the Ancient he chose and carrying that influence forward through time.
As the last blades were drawn across my body, and my blood cooled upon the floor, she cursed that I would only be with another in death.
There's also another figure, sitting just outside that central struggle, Mantarok. Mantarok exists in a different relationship to the cycle. It's tied to chaos and balance, operating alongside the other Ancients rather than competing with them directly. Its role isn't fully clear on a first run, but it starts making more sense the more of the game you see, especially once the endings come into focus. Because Eternal Darkness isn't built around a single conclusion. Finishing the game once gives you a complete version of events, but the structure encourages you to keep going. You're meant to play through the game 3 times, choosing a different Ancient alignment each run. Each playthrough reveals a different outcome, shaped by which Ancient was dominant in that timeline. Those runs aren't treated like overwrites, they exist as parallel timelines, separate universes unfolding alongside each other. When all 3 paths are completed, a 4th ending becomes available, one that reframes the entire story and shows how those timelines connect behind the scenes. That structure reinforces what the story keeps circling around. Across all the places and centuries you visit, ancient temples, medieval ruins, modern-day Rhode Island, the same forces keep resurfacing. Different people step into the conflict, different tools get used, different decisions get made. The pressure itself keeps returning though. Edward Roivas plays an important role in that build-up.
The mansion's history was filled with my colorful predecessors. Everything from convicted and hung witches to committed madmen, each laying their own peculiar mark on its character. I intended to find their secrets.
Over years, he uncovers an ancient city beneath the estate, magic, preparations for a final confrontation. He spends his life trying to understand what's coming and how to delay it. His murder grows out of how close he gets to interfering with forces that have already outlasted countless people. Alex steps into that space after him. By the time she reaches the final confrontation, she's carrying centuries of accumulated knowledge, from everything that's passed through the tome by the people who came before her. The outcome of that confrontation shifts depending on which ancient alignment you're on, while the overall shape of the struggle stays the same. Choice really matters here, just not in the sense of breaking free. Choosing an ancient determines the path you experience, the enemies you face, and the ending you reach. Each path shows a different angle of the same cycle playing out. Even the true ending frames success as survival, as containment as buying time. The focus stays on understanding the horror well enough to keep it from fully taking over, at least for now. That idea keeps repeating. People pass, knowledge carries forward, the threat remains. Eternal Darkness holds on to that all the way through, enduring long enough to pass something on. There's a few reasons Eternal Darkness stopped where it did, and most of them land in the same area, the Sanity system. Nintendo actually holds a patent on it, and that goes back to the early 2000s, and it's really specific. It covers the way the game messes with presentation, throws out fake system messages, and plays directly with how the player perceives what's happening on screen. That patent comes up a lot when people talk about why the idea never really went anywhere else. Once it existed in that form, the system stopped being this loose experimental thing and started being something very defined. Going back to it meant working inside that exact framework again, rather than letting the idea stretch or evolve naturally. Nintendo's relationship with the game kind of reflected that same distance. This was a Nintendo-published title, it carried an M rating, it lived outside what people usually associated with the brand. It became the first Nintendo-published game to get that rating, and it stayed a one-off. It came out, it existed, and it sat slightly apart from everything else Nintendo was doing at the time. There was never much sense that this was going to grow into something bigger. It wasn't positioned that way. It didn't really get folded into Nintendo's long-term identity. It just stayed separate. Then there's the issue of how a game like this even gets sold. A lot of what people remember the most about Eternal Darkness are moments that don't really survive explanation. Fake crashes, save data scares, controller disconnect messages, stuff that only works when it hits you out of nowhere. Those moments depend on timing, on surprise, on the player not knowing what's about to happen. Once you try to explain them ahead of time, the effect starts to fade, and leaving them unexplained means asking players to trust a game that actively pretends something's wrong. That puts the whole concept in a weird spot. Its strongest ideas don't show well in trailers. They don't boil down cleanly into screenshots or taglines, and they mess with players' trust in a way that's powerful creatively but uncomfortable when you're trying to pitch sequels or expansions. Then the studio itself disappears from the picture. Silicon Knights eventually left Nintendo, got pulled into a long legal fight with Epic Games, and apparently was found to have misused Unreal Engine code. By 2014, the studio was gone. Whatever chance there was for a direct continuation made by the same people ended there. Nintendo still has the IP, but now there's no original team. No clear roadmap for updating the idea, and no obvious way to move forward without sanding down the parts that made the game work. What you're left with is this gap between how the game is remembered and how it fits into the industry. Eternal Darkness turned into a cult classic. People still bring it up when they talk about psychological horror in games. It stuck with people. It never turned into a series. It didn't branch out, it didn't become something that could be repeated or scaled comfortably. The industry usually gravitates towards ideas that behave in predictable ways, and this one never really did. That's kind of the through line here. Eternal Darkness didn't stop because it failed, it stopped because it was inconvenient. When this game first came out, the response was pretty solid. Critics really liked it. A lot of the attention obviously went straight to the Sanity effects. That was the thing people talked about first, the way the game messed with perception, the way it blurred the line between what the player was seeing and what the system itself was doing. The idea stuck. The narrative ambition got attention too, the way the story stretched across centuries, the way it trusted the player to piece things together without constant reinforcement. The psychological angle mattered more than spectacle, and that stood out at the time. There were criticisms, of course. The combat felt stiff to some people, the pacing could feel uneven. Repetition came up, especially once players realized how the structure worked. Those points were there from the start, and they've stayed part of the conversation. What changed over time wasn't really how the game played, it was the landscape around it. As horror games kept evolving, a lot of them leaned harder into presentation, cinematic framing, scripted sequences, reactive scares built around timing and surprise, audio cues designed to trigger an immediate response, or set pieces meant to be remembered as moments. And that became more common. Eternal Darkness started standing out in a different way. People stopped talking about it as a GameCube horror game. It started coming up as an idea, a reference point. An example of psychological horror that wasn't built around shock or escalation. An early case of meta horror that understood how players think and used that as part of the experience. That shift is important.
This isn't really happening.
A lot of modern horror is built around reaction. Something happens, you respond, fear shows up in short bursts, you feel it, process it, then move on to the next moment. Eternal Darkness works on a slower rhythm. The discomfort builds out of uncertainty, out of doubt, out of trust decaying. The experience settles in over time. You start questioning your footing without the game ever needing to push harder or louder. Designing around that takes risks. It's harder to test, harder to market, and harder to balance. It asks the player to sit with ambiguity, to stay engaged without constant action, to accept that clarity might not arrive right away. That's a big reason you don't see this approach very often. When people talk about horror, there's usually a difference made between fear and unease. Fear hits fast, unease lingers. It sticks around. It doesn't need to keep announcing itself to stay present. Eternal Darkness comes up a lot in that kind of conversation. It's remembered for letting doubt breathe, for avoiding constant prompts, for allowing silence and uncertainty to do real work. That sustained discomfort is a big part of why it feels unusual. A lot of that ties back to trust. Most games depend on it. Clear feedback, consistent behavior, systems that do what you expect them to do. That trust usually fades into the background while you play. Eternal Darkness keeps nudging at it. The screen, the system, the assumptions you bring with you. Over time, you're not just questioning what's happening, but how you're reading it. That uncertainty becomes part of the experience itself. Few games lean into that intentionally. It sits awkwardly with a lot of modern design priorities. Ambiguity replaces clarity, comfort gives way to tension. Those choices are hard to justify when you're building something meant to scale cleanly. That's also why the game hasn't really softened with age. A lot of horror loses its edge once visuals improve elsewhere or patterns become familiar. Eternal Darkness isn't tied to fidelity. It works on player expectation, on experience, on the habits people bring with them when they play games. If anything, that makes it land harder now. People are more fluid, more confident, more comfortable reading systems, and the game still finds ways to unsettle that confidence. That's why this game still matters. Most horror games wanted a reaction. Eternal Darkness wanted belief. And that's a different kind of risk. When you step back and look at Eternal Darkness as a whole, what stands out is how deliberately it carries itself. It's a game built around uncertainty, around letting things sit, around trusting the player to stay engaged even when clarity isn't immediate. That approach shapes everything, the systems, pacing, the story, the way it interacts with you while you're playing it. That's why it still holds its place. It doesn't rely on novelty wearing off or spectacle aging out. It works through how you think and how you read games, and how comfortable you are with what's happening in front of you. And that's a space very few games choose to operate in. But if y'all have made it to the end, I really appreciate y'all for hanging out with me. If you enjoyed the video, consider subbing and sticking around the save room for a little bit. Drop me a comment, let me know what you thought of Eternal Darkness or thought of the video. Again, thank you all so much for all the support. But as always, I'll see y'all later.
May the rats eat your eyes! I am now lost!